Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Cervini. I'm partner in charge of government services here at Sikich. Excited to welcome you to day one of Sikich's 2023 Higher Education CFO Forum. We're really grateful that you've taken some time out of your day to participate in the forum, and really just excited about the lineup that we have for the next couple of days, or next 3 days for you as part of the CFO Forum. So we've been doing this for several years, continuing to really just excited to showcase our knowledge, our expertise in a variety of spaces on that. So again, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. We'll start off going through some housekeeping items this morning. If you have a chance to, please make sure you update your nameplate in Zoom to your first name, last name, and your institution for that. That'll just help us track attendance as well as the information needed for CPE over the next few days. If you do have any questions throughout any of the sessions over the next 3 days, I encourage you to ask those questions. We've got a great group of experts over the next few days on this, and happy to answer any questions that we can as part of that. If for whatever reason we're not able to get to your question during this session, we will retain all of this and be able to reach out after the fact should you have a follow-up question, or should there be anything that we're not able to get to as part of the sessions there. Finally, before I kick things over to our human capital management team, just a little bit about Sikich here. Many of you know Sikich from our traditional CPA firm roots on this. As you'll find over the next 3 days, we are that and so much more. Excited to have our human capital management team today, as well as our workforce risk management team presenting our second session for today. And really just want to be able to showcase all the things that we can do at Sikich for you, providing a wealth of information over the next several days for you there. Again, can encourage you to ask questions throughout the process. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Ken Cranny, who heads up our human capital management team. We'll take it off from there. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. Very excited to welcome you all as well to the 2023 Higher Education CFO Forum. And in this session, we are going to dive into how modern is your HR technology. I'd like to start by introducing our team. As Anthony mentioned, I'm Ken Cranny. I'm the partner responsible for our human capital management and payroll consulting practice. I've been in this space for over 25 years, worked in both higher ed, as well as many other industries, helping organizations maximize their investment in their HR and payroll technology. I'm joined by Gary Humphrey, a managing director on our team. Gary brings over 35 years of experience in the human capital management and broad ERP space. Gary has extensive experience in the full life cycle of technology management, from strategic planning to implementation and optimization. I'm also joined by Cindy Walter, who's a managing director on our team with over 40 years of experience, both in human capital technology as well as broad human resources. Cindy has experience in higher ed, as well as many other industries, has a wealth of expertise in the management of HR technology and leading complex human capital management projects. And finally, I'm joined by Steve Dawson, a managing director who brings over 25 years of experience in the HCM and ERP space. Steve has led many complex HCM projects and has extensive experience with day-to-day management of leading HR technology solutions. And he also has extensive experience in higher ed as well as other industries. So I'd like to take a moment to review the disclaimer slide. I'll just leave this up for you to read and review as we dive into the presentation. So during this session, we're going to cover 4 areas: the challenges with legacy HR technology that you may be facing, the benefits and capabilities of modern HR technology and what it can provide to your organization, what the journey to a modern solution involves, and finally, how to maximize your investment in HR technology. Now, as we put this session together, we recognize that you're all coming from different situations and different solutions. So we've structured this to provide valuable information no matter where you are in your journey with your HR technology. Whether you're firmly on legacy technology with no plans to make a change, planning to move, or have already started a move to a modern cloud solution, or maybe you're already on a modern cloud solution and looking for how to derive more value from it. We're going to provide information on all of those situations throughout this session. So to get us started, we have our first poll question. What are your institution's top 3 HR priorities this year? So take a moment to answer the poll and try and highlight those priorities that are key to your organization this year. And the code word for today, code word 1 of 6, is 548. Your first code word, 1 of 6, is 548. So please follow the directions on the screen to submit the code word. And again, one last time, code word 1 of 6 is 548. So as you can see from the poll results, there is a good spread across the many options. And the reason that we selected these is as we talk to organizations about what's driving their organization, and more importantly, how can your technology help you deliver on business results? These are the things that we're hearing from our other clients. And as you saw in the results, attraction and retention is key. No surprise to any of you that that's a high priority. Improving employee experience is something that has gotten more and more steam over the past few years, and especially with the remote workforce. And attraction and retention, as I mentioned, and achieving efficiency and effectiveness are key. So thank you for sharing that. The question as we dive into this is, if these are your priorities, how well is your technology positioned to support you in the next 1 to 2 years? So what are you trying to achieve, and how is technology making it easy for you to achieve those goals? So as you start to think about that question, you may ask some of these questions of yourself. Do you have dashboards that provide actionable information to support your decisions? Can employees use mobile technology? And managers use mobile technology to access information? Are you able to pull the metrics and analytics that tell you if your programs are working or if adjustments are needed? Do you have the skills to compete? Are your processes simple and transparent? These questions and many more boil down to 2 things. If you are implementing a new program, how easy is it for your organization to execute that program? And how easy is it for you to get the information you need to tell if your human resources programs are delivering the results you expected? And all of the underpinning to do that is your technology. But if you're finding these as challenges, you're certainly not alone. And one of the reasons that many organizations have this challenge is because we found that organizations have underinvested in their HR technology over the years. And so you may ask yourself, well, what does underinvestment look like? What do I mean by that? Historically, many institutions have underinvested because they have a mindset that HCM and HR aren't strategic and that the investment can wait. And so you end up with things like a situation where you have lots of workarounds and band-aids. You have a situation where HR is the primary end user. What do I mean by that? So your solutions and processes aren't designed for your faculty, your managers and staff. They're primarily designed for human resources. And if you are looking to improve your situation, simplifying your processes is either too difficult or too costly to undertake because of the solution being too rigid. The other thing that we see often is processes that have a single point of failure. One person that knows how the process works and no one else does, or it is hard and time consuming to troubleshoot and solve problems. You fix one thing, it breaks another. So what you find in the organizations that have underinvested is more and more of your team's time and resources goes into keeping the lights on and keeping the solution working and not deriving value from the solution. And as I mentioned at the outset, some of that comes from a mindset. This is not strategic, but we do see that mindset changing, especially as we've lived through the pandemic, as the workforce has changed, remote workforce and other challenges have come into play. More organizations are looking at this and different potential value that they can achieve from the human resources function. And we also find, surprisingly, even though we're going to talk a lot about moving to a modern solution, we also find that organizations that have moved to modern solutions have underinvested as well, either in the implementation or what it takes to support the solution once it's live. It's a significant investment, and organizations are often looking for ways to manage that investment. So we see organizations that have lifted and shifted their old solution. They've taken their old broken processes and programs and put it in the new system, rather than taking the time up front to design the solution that best leverages their new solution and gets the right value for their investment. Many organizations also have let vendors drive their implementation. And the vendors are driven, as you'll hear more about this as we go through the session, the vendors are driven to implement successfully on a certain time frame. Your goal is to get the most value out of this investment. And sometimes those don't align, and the time is needed to really identify and pursue the best options to meet your needs. Many organizations as well budget for these new systems as if go live is the end. And it's really the beginning of the journey. As you know, these modern solutions continue to release updates, and many organizations simply don't take advantage of those updates. You get to the implementation, you're happy that you're there, but then the care and feeding falls off of the new solution and you don't realize the full benefit. So we're going to talk more and more about those topics throughout the session, but hopefully that gives you an overview of what's to come. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Cindy Walter, who will dive deeper on some of the challenges with legacy HR technology.
Thank you, Ken, for setting us up and asking some of those important questions for all of us to keep in mind, not only as we go through this presentation, but as we go back and work with our technology solutions. So as we look at some of the challenges with the current legacy HR technology solutions, there's a number of sort of big picture items to talk about and to think about. The first one is, if you're on a legacy technology solution, how many add-ons, you might call them bolt-ons, you might call them subsystems, do you have on top of that core system? And are those add-ons masking the efficiency or the inefficiency, actually, of that aging core system? So do you really know, when you sort through all of those add-ons, where your system of record is for each of your critical data items? Have you lost the view of what your systems are, how data is flowing? Do you have a spaghetti chart of data goes in here, out there, back there, forth there? And how many integrations do you have with other solutions? And have you diminished the integrations with your core solutions like finance, treasury, and payroll? One of the answers to the poll question was about attraction and retention. So aging solutions are not going to help you attract and retain current employees, especially high energy, high performing resources. People want current technology. And it's not just IT people who want current technology. HR people want to use modern technology. Finance people, they want the technology to be easy and obvious. Old systems demand old resource skills, and those are diminishing as well. So one of the big challenges is, as you're consuming resources being time, money, people, trying to support that old technology, your missing those opportunities to do those current projects, to look forward to where you need to be. And the last thing really here is if your HCM and your finance teams are sharing a single solution, and you may be sharing that solution with IT and others as well, your student technology, the journey to a new HCM solution will require good relationships with your colleagues to determine if you're going together, if each of you can or should go differently or singly or in a certain priority. There are cybersecurity threats. We're not going to talk about those in this presentation. There is a practice at Sikich if you have any questions or concerns in that area. Some of the other challenges are around the user experience. Mobile first. Students, faculty, staff want mobile first. They don't want to carry around even a laptop anymore, no matter how small and lightweight your laptops are getting. People want to be able to access their personal information, or if they're on call on the weekend, they want to be able to access their work information in the palm of their hand. And old legacy solutions don't have a lot of options in that area. There's a lot of shifting when you have subsystems, brain shifting from system A to subsystem B, or hands-on keyboard shifting from A to B. You might not have any single sign-on. And training is handed down like folklore. You probably don't have a single source of training. You probably don't have current documentation. So how people use the system is inconsistent. Your system may work, your legacy technology may work, and the measure in place today by some parts of your organization might be, are people getting paid? And the answer could well be yes. But is your system not only paying your employees, but is your data audited across your subsystems? Do you have the opportunity and the requirement to override? So when you've got bad data, you call somebody that you know and you say, hey, can you fix this? Can you override it? The populations between students, faculty, and staff, you have a mix. You may have parts of those populations that are transient, and those are going to add complexity, where mobile first will allow you to simplify some of that complexity. If there's one challenge that you asked us, what's the biggest challenge? It would be business intelligence, the ability to gather information, put it on the desktop of your decision makers at all times. And as that information changes, what's on the desktop changes, so that decisions are made on consistent, high quality, current information. The other part of information that can be challenging is if today you have someone you go to get a report, to ask a question of, and tomorrow that person's not here, so you repeat the question, that person may interpret the question differently and may go to a different source for the data, creating some inaccuracy or misinterpretation. Data accuracy is critical, data audits are critical. Access to data may be limited across some of those multiple bolt-on systems. There were some things we learned in the pandemic. Some of them we had an idea about, but some became very real during the pandemic. And it's important in the context of legacy technology, because legacy technology is not as mobile, is not as agile as other solutions are. So the lack of agility to handle new requirements quickly, because we have to get people together. In order to get people together who are working remotely, there's more of a time lag. There may be a lack of data quality because you're lagging in your audits or people are entering data differently, and usability and process challenges are real for remote workers. There's one other thing to think about in terms of learning these solutions, teaching these solutions, supporting these solutions. If you are in a cubicle environment, or if you're co-located in a building, you see people, you hear people in the lunchroom, in the hallway. two things happen across the cubicle walls. Two things happen. One is you have access to ask questions that might be a quick question and a quick answer that makes the difference between an accurate piece of information or an inaccurate piece of information. The second is you're exposed to ambient information. That means people in other cubicles and other spaces are speaking. You're hearing stuff that may be critical to a decision or an issue that you have next week or next month. The loss of physical proximity and the lack of mobile access and agility are dragging down the ability to effectively manage legacy technologies. Here's a quick graphic that will let you take away and look at, but this is from Sapient Technologies, and this is a graph on the annual per employee HR technology cost. And even more important than the cost is how many system integrations you have between your HR system and other solutions. Those other solutions might be outsourced benefit partners, an outsourced payroll department, all sorts of outsourced vendors, as well as the myriad of technologies you have within your own environment. So this is good information. It talks about the cost of HR technology, and the cost will per employee is higher for smaller organizations than it is for larger organizations, which makes sense because you're spreading it across either more or fewer employees. So we have another poll question for you. How long has your institution had its current HR technology system? And we're anywhere from 0 to 1, 1 to 3, which means relatively recently you've upgraded, perhaps to a cloud solution, a SaaS solution, to 5 or more years where you've been in the same solution for a long period of time. So we'll give you just a minute to respond. And while you're thinking about that, code word 2 of 6 for today is 708. Please follow the instructions on this slide. And there are also instructions in the chat in case you're struggling with how to enter those code words and where to enter them. So code word 2 of 6 is 708. So it looks like the largest number of participants have been on their current solution for 10 or more years. That probably means that some of the challenges that we've just walked through, again, whether they're in your student environment, your faculty environment, or your staff environment, those challenges are very real for you. And you probably have a large audience who's looking forward to a newer solution. Fair number at 5 to 10 years, and then some who are newer, 3 to 5 years. So if you're closer to 5 years, you're probably close to thinking about what's the next phase. And then it looks like there are some folks who have moved recently, which is exciting. And hopefully you're getting the advantage of all of the upgrades that happen from those vendors, usually on a quarterly basis. They're sending you functionality upgrades. So that's pretty exciting. So let's talk about why we want to go to a modern solution. What's in it for you? Why have other institutions taken the time to invest when you're still on an old technology? And one thing to think about that we mentioned a little bit earlier, and that Ken referred to as well, is who has to get together to make a decision to change. These are very significant decisions. They're significant from a budget perspective, they're significant from a people perspective, and they're significant from a time perspective. And after after I finish this section, Gary's actually going to take you through some of that so that you're aware of it. So why have others invested? To enable business transformation. Where you were yesterday isn't where you need to be today or tomorrow. You can't drive forward down the highway by looking in the rearview mirror all the time. In fact, you're probably going to crash sooner or later. They've invested because they want to define, they want to streamline, they want to automate processes. So I'm going to talk just for a minute about process, because process means different things to different people. Process means I've got an Excel spreadsheet in my drawer that when somebody calls me for an override, I open my drawer, I look at my Excel spreadsheet that tells me, here's the 3 things I need to do, and I do those things. Process may mean a big Visio diagram that says, that has swim lanes and says person A is doing this, person B is doing this, function X is doing this. So there's a wide range. I would challenge most of us, and this is based on the clients that we work with, to go and find consistent documentation around how we work, and how we work will consume time and resource. We want to move to shared services. So in legacy solutions, very often you have to have resources who are managing the hardware and the software. Moving to a modern solution allows you to outsource all of that and not have to manage that any longer. You want to provide, we say managers here, but really we're talking about students, faculty, the provost's office, the staff. We want to provide all of the users, everyone who touches and comes into contact with that solution, tools that are easy to use, tools that allow them to measure and to manage all aspects of talent. So when we say talent, we're talking about skills, performance, cost, compensation, but also to manage the budget and to manage other aspects of the organization that touch people. The cloud solutions are scalable. If you go out and you acquire another university, another college, and you're acquiring 500 new employees, the modern solutions can fairly easily take on that change without a whole lot of problem. They're very scalable. The product continues to evolve. So rather than every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you have a major project to upgrade the solution, move all of the old data and all of the old information to a new solution. The vendors typically will release upgrades on a quarterly basis. And if there's something that comes up in the regulatory environment, they'll release it very quickly so that you're on top of not only governmental changes, but also functionality changes. And the vendors very often allow the users, so allow their clients to have input on where they're going with the development of the product. You're going to mitigate risk from many perspectives. You're going to differentiate yourself from other institutions in terms of having that modern technology, that mobile first, that desktop decision module, those charts and graphs. And then technology can be a business driver. And by that, you face less obsolescence. You don't have to face major upgrades. As Ken mentioned, some institutions who are on cloud-based solutions miss the opportunity to go ahead and upgrade because they don't accept the upgrades, but they're there, and they're there without a major project to go and implement them. So you want to identify the right goals for your institution to determine how you can be successful and realize the return on the investment of people, of money, and of skills. So what can a solution provide to you? First and foremost, integrated analytics, decision-making information on the desktop, current at all times. Seamless mobile capabilities. Mobile is part of these solutions. Many of them are built mobile first. Rich and powerful end user experience, regardless of your audience. Students will love this stuff because if you tell them they got to go find a laptop somewhere, they're probably not going to be very happy. Business transformation. Higher ed is transforming just like other businesses. You need the capability to transform higher ed based on who you're currently attracting and who you need to attract. Less IT support because you're on a cloud solution, so someone else is taking care of that. Rapid innovation as your organization changes, as you have ideas on where you want to go. And another one is system availability, much higher system availability with service level agreements. And finally, access to support resources who you're not paying just to fix hardware and software solutions, but who are knowledge resources to help you move your organization forward. With that, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Gary, who's going to talk to you about the journey forward.
Hi, so yeah, I'm covering journey to a modern solution. You'll notice I didn't say pleasant journey. Hopefully it wouldn't be a perilous journey. But what we really want to focus on is making that journey a planned journey. So it's focusing on trying to do the right things at the right time to make this the easiest journey possible. I'm going to start with a poll question. Which statement best describes where your institution stands regarding replacing its current HR solution? And if you're on an old one, hopefully it's not A, you haven't thought about it. And actually on F and G, so if you've gone live maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it was smooth, just do that one. And if you've gone live 2 or 3 years ago and you weren't ready, you can use G. But I'll give you a moment to finish that poll. Okay. So yeah, as we see a lot of planning going on, and that aligns with certainly the numbers of the age of some of the systems, and actually 9% that haven't thought about it. It's kind of a funny thing. The higher ed group is interesting in the fact that you do get caught up, especially if you're on a legacy system, you do get caught up in obviously budget and bandwidth and timing. But quite often it's a larger enterprise decision that includes the pesky student system, which has a lot of it's still fairly new in the cloud market space. Even people that have gone on HR or gone on finance still are integrating with an older student administration system. So certainly not uncommon in your group. But regardless of what that polling question was, we pretty much knew people would align in one of three categories. So you're either firmly on legacy technology now, or you're planning to move, or maybe even in the process of moving, or you're already on a modern cloud solution. I think all the numbers align that. But regardless of which camp you're in there are some things you can do to improve your situation and your position. So if you're on a legacy system now, the biggest thing with legacy systems is it's very easy to get complacent and just kind of settle for this is as good as it gets mentality. It's very easy to say this is the system we have, this is what it does. We're kind of stuck with it till we have something else. But there's some things you can do even if you're not moving for a year, 2 years, think about what you're doing today that improve not only your position now on your legacy technology, but ease the path forward to modern. So aligning your business priorities and strategic plans, like Cindy and Ken had said, those may have changed over the years, but aligning them to your current capabilities. So start thinking about skills, staffing, training. Are you set up organizationally the way where you're going to get the maximum benefit out of new technology and your current legacy technology? Reviewing your roadmap obviously is a great thing to continually do. Your technology picture within HR is going to change, but it's also all the integrations. So we've had customers that have gotten stuck in a position where they can't upgrade some other system because then they may have compatibility issues with their older HR. Benchmarking with your peers. I mentioned the higher ed community. It is indeed a community. And I know that there's a lot of talk within the higher ed world. I worked previously for a company that did a lot of higher ed implementations of PeopleSoft and Workday. And I know for a fact that if we did a good job on a project, people knew about it. If we did a poor job on a project, people really knew about it. So I know you do talk. It's important to kind of talk about what people are thinking, what they're planning, where their head is at, who else is doing things. All those types of things are great. So definitely focus on your community, because higher ed is different. And it's, you're not going to align like a Nike or an Adidas or one of those type companies all the time. Reviewing your total cost of ownership, that kind of aligns with those capabilities. How many people does it take to support your system? How many third-party applications do you have? Same with streamline and simplify. Everything you do now, those processes, if you're focusing on we do what we've always done, you're kind of missing the boat a little bit on trying to take advantage of things now that will help you in the future. The more you streamline that, the more simplify that, makes it easier to move. And the risk assessment, I know Ken brought up that single threaded or single point of failure. It's a huge issue everywhere. So that one person that if they take a leave of absence or leave the organization or institution, or even just a process, if this process breaks, we're screwed. It's important to kind of look at those and try and plan contingencies around them. Sorry, I got to change myself here. If you are planning to move to a modern cloud or you're in process, all these things here are very important. And I told you on the previous slide, talk to your peers. Yes, talk to your peers, but it's also important not to get caught up with keep up with the Joneses type of mentality. Other institutions' situation is not necessarily your own. They may have differences in personnel and staff and goals, budgets, all those things. So understand that all of this work to plan to a modern cloud solution is your plan to move to a modern cloud solution. And honestly, this is a project. It's likely a project that you'll need some help with. These are very clear steps. There's required objectiveness to it. And companies like Sikich and other companies, we're adept at doing this on a regular basis with all the systems that were older in the previous poll. It's obvious a lot of people haven't maybe done this in a while. So it's important to go out and find somebody that can maybe help you through this process and guide you through it, because it does really take on the aspect of a project. Now, if you've already in that and you're starting the implementation project, you can go back to your peers again and talk to them again, especially if they're peers that maybe went live recently on something or they're deep into an implementation, because those lessons learned will help you. And I suspect a lot of those things that were on the previous slides about do this and do that and streamline this, they're going to say, boy, I wish I'd have done that. I wish I'd have taken the time to plan this properly. This is your implementation, and it's not a turnkey effort. You may hire like Sikich to help manage and drive this process with you, but you have to be engaged. It's something that you'll be very involved with. This is focusing on your transformation and your adoption of the new technology, and we do want to specifically align them to your successes and your businesses and your all the objectives that you want. I know, once again, Ken had mentioned that if the vendor drives the implementation, that their focus is on software and timeline. Your vendor does want you to be successful, but they do want it. They define what's success on their criteria, and you want this project, the success defined by your criteria. So you helping drive that project really allows you to meet your business goals. What is success for you, and designing towards the future. This doesn't want to be I have a new version of my old system. I'm not slamming it in. You really want to involve yourself in this process. In most cases, when you sign the subscription for a SaaS vendor, you start paying at that point. The analogy I used was, it's like paying for cable before you have a TV, or I guess nowadays paying for Netflix before you have Wi-Fi or a device to watch it on. But it's important to understand that timeline and stuff is there, but success is driven by your objectives, not necessarily the timeline, not necessarily the budget. Now, if you're already on a modern cloud solution, it's hard to be self-aware. Were you ready when you went live? Did you have to do a phase 2, a phase 3? Did it fit you and your business objectives, or did you just go live? That's where I get into that. Sometimes there are rapid implementations, or we've got to hit this date because there's a deadline we have to meet, and that deadline is based on maybe the ending of my legacy system support. So those types of things drive for going live, not for going live successfully. There's a lot of things in new solutions that, like business intelligence, this very first bullet, it's a completely different way of reporting and how people consume information, dashboards and charts and all those types of things that are continually updated. So taking advantage of those sort of things really is a whole different paradigm. I know we also mentioned that it's an ever enhancing, changing systems, new modern cloud solutions. They're adapting all the time. They're adding new functionality. You have to be prepared to do that. You want to set up some sort of governance to review new functionality, get involved in it, understand what it's doing, be able to test it. And this is a perfect example to challenge your team to develop power users, develop thought leaders within your organization. They can help you do all these things, fine tune the processes. And the last bullet on here, I mentioned the vendor does want you to be successful, but this is your chance to really have them put some skin in the game. You can work with them on, maybe there's some holes and things you still had to do that were a little different, and the product doesn't quite meet all your objectives, but that other 10% you want to get, if you work with the vendor on their development roadmap, it may get you some solutions that actually even better fit your needs and better help you in the future. And that is mine, and I'm going to hand it off to Steve Dawson to talk to you about phase 0 on project preparation. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And good morning, everyone. So on a previous slide, we made a statement that preparation is critical to success. So for those of you that are on a legacy platform and thinking about a transition to a modern solution, I want to help translate that advice into something actionable. And so, our advice to you is to structure those preparation activities into a formalized project phase that we refer to as phase. And we see sort of 4 major type of activities that are happening here. And we're going to kind of talk through each of these in detail. But there's strategy, there's structure, there's timeline, and there's budget. All right, so first up is strategy. So what does this look like? So this is typically your CIO, your CFO, your
Hey,
CHRO.
Steve, this is Ken.
Yes.
Your audio is breaking up. I don't know if it's the headphones or what have you.
All right, hold on a sec. Let's try.
How's this?
That's better so far.
Better? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so back to strategy. So this is your CHRO, your CFO, your CIO, working together to answer a number of strategic questions, right? And really putting pen to paper. So for example, we talked earlier about the fact that in higher ed, right, you're going to have sort of this 3-legged stool, right? You have an HR system, you have a financial system, you have a student system. So what's in scope, right? Is it all 3? Is it just HR? Is it HR plus finance, right? What are you trying to accomplish? what type of impact are you trying to have on the institution? And what does that impact look like from, an administrative perspective? What does it look like from the academic perspective, right? How does it impact employees? How does it impact students? Right, it's important to be able to articulate that. What's your point of view on in the cloud versus on premise? What's your point of view on, do we want a one-stop shop? Are we looking to have sort of a best in class in each category? All the answers to all of these questions will really give shape to the initiative as it unfolds. Okay, and then from there we transition into people considerations. So first up would be, for example, who's your steering committee, right? Who is it that's going to sort of oversee this initiative, make sure it stays on track, but also help to resolve conflicts as they arise. So when time and budget and scope are in conflict, who's going to resolve that? Who's going to help prioritize? Which things are more important than other things. So typically we see, a cross-functional governance team is critical to success, right? And then we get into the project team itself and really starting to think about what does the makeup of that team look like? How do we get representatives from across the institution? Again, we need HR, we need IT, we need finance, we need we need people from the provost office, the chancellor's office, right, et cetera, in order to have, broad-based representation. You probably want to have, a number of people that have a lot of institutional knowledge. You also likely would benefit from having some people that actually have shorter tenure at the institution, who may have experience, more recent experience in other institutions, again, to help cross-pollinate the team. You're thinking about overall, what type of skills and competencies do I need? And frankly, what amount of capacity do I need to get this work done? And ultimately where that's going to lead you is you're going to start to see some fits and gaps. And, that's going to inform where you need to augment your team and supplement your team. And that's going to, feed into some of the budgetary conversation that we'll have shortly. Okay, timeline. So there are going to be a number of timeline constraints. Some of this is informed by decisions you made, in some of those strategic conversations. So for example, as we get to a rollout, are we thinking that this is a big bang? Or are we thinking that we're rolling this out in phases? And what do those phases look like, right? Are they different, functional modules? Or is it geographical? What are some of the other drivers that might constrain us from a timing perspective? So for example, as mentioned previously, maybe you're merging with another institution. And so there's kind of a key date that you need to hit. Maybe your current solution is reaching end of life and support ends at a certain date, right? That's going to be a constraint. So sort of all of those timeline considerations sort of need to get documented. And then finally, right, all of this kind of feeds into developing a preliminary budget. So again, this is going to be fairly high level, but as you're starting to think about, software and services and potentially, staff augmentation, right? All of that obviously has a cost. And then as you lay that cost in over time and start thinking about, hey, what can I capitalize? What's going to flow through to the expense line? A draft budget starts to emerge, which is going to be key. Okay, so two additional pieces of advice here. The first is you're going to have the best chance of success if you find a champion within the institution, someone that's got the ear of the leadership, who can clearly articulate the challenges that the institution faces and how this initiative is going to help to address those challenges and take the organization forward. And if you can find multiple champions, you need at least one, but if you can find multiple, all the better, right? There's no need for it to be a single person. But at the end of the day, you need at least one person who is a strong advocate for this initiative and can hopefully gain support for moving this forward. I think the second piece of advice that we would give you is hire an external expert. More than likely, within your institution, you don't have recent experience moving to a new platform. It's very uncommon at clients actually to find that experience. And this is very complex, challenging work. You would get a lot of benefit out of finding someone who has been through this before and can help your institution avoid some of the common pitfalls, sort of accelerate the learning curve as you migrate to a SaaS solution. But beyond, that kind of specific expertise, another area where an expert can really help you is looking in the mirror and benchmarking some of your internal practices and some of your internal challenges and helping you to understand where potentially you're out of step with your peers and that there are perhaps opportunities to harmonize and streamline that have been overlooked. And institutions often have a hard time doing that for themselves. An expert, someone who's objective, someone who doesn't have a stake in the outcome, so they don't care what vendor you pick. That type of unbiased expert can also really help you when it comes to process improvement and ultimately picking a solution that's going to be the best fit for your organization. All right, we have our third code word. So this is code word 3 of 6, and the code is 911. Should be easy to remember. Code word 3 of 6 is 911. If you can follow the directions on the screen and put that into your Conference IO app. Okay, and finally, I want to say a few words about, once you finally get to this modern HR solution, how do you maximize your return on investment? Okay, so I think the first piece of advice that we would give you is invariably along the way, you're gonna start with a certain amount of scope in your initial implementation, and more than likely, you're going to be forced to descope some items. Most clients tend to bite off more than they can chew at the beginning. And then, as the project progresses, they start to realize that, hey, in order to kind of deliver something of high quality on, whatever date it is that we've set, we may need to narrow our focus a little bit. And so it is not uncommon that your initial scope gets refined and you find yourself, you get to go live and you find that there are just, still a number of items that need to be addressed. For example, you may go live, but, with your core HCM, but you didn't implement talent, or you didn't implement, recruiting or compensation or benefits, and you've decided to defer those to a phase 2. That's okay. In some cases, it's actually better to have a scope that you can really digest and be successful with rather than trying to boil the ocean in phase 1. So our advice here is keep the project intact. Don't disband upon your initial go live. Plan for a phase 2 and keep the team intact, and then deliver, a second phase with some of those additional items like benefits, compensation, etc. We've seen that approach be very, very successful with clients. So that's part of that. It's about managing expectations, both the project team's expectations and the institution's expectations, that not everything's coming in phase 1. Beyond that, phase two, as I think Cindy mentioned earlier, one of the great benefits of SaaS solutions is that they are delivering feature updates to you multiple times a year. So one of the new skills that your organization needs to learn is how to manage those feature updates and continue to deliver enhancements to your organization on a regular basis, right? Upgrades become a multiple time a year event, not once every 3 to 5 years. And you know, doing that well, again, requires some different skills and competencies within the organization. You'll need to make an investment in your team. So your team needs to learn very new skills, right, to manage this new platform. So for those legacy staff that are migrating to support the new platform, they're going to need a lot of training to get there. And that training doesn't end when you have your initial go live, right? So I would plan on continuing to invest in the team. Lastly, adoption. So what we've observed is, you know, most clients make a huge push around, you know, training and communication to support their go live. And that's fantastic, right? That's necessary, but that's not sufficient. That beyond your initial phase one go live, you need to continue with reinforced communication, reinforced training. In order to really drive that adoption, you're going to have to make continued investments in change, you know, well beyond your go live. And if you do all these things, you will find that you're getting more than likely an excellent return on your investment. Okay, and so lastly, in summary, you know, these modern HR technology platforms can be very transformative for your organization. However, we find that a number of institutions overpromise and underdeliver. And, you know, probably the best piece of advice we can give you to try to avoid that is find yourself an experienced partner that can help you navigate through this journey, and your chances of success will go up tremendously. And with that, Ken, I think I am handing back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, team. Excellent job. So I will we'll take a look at questions now. We have a few minutes for questions. Okay, we do have one. So first up, what are your thoughts on rapid deployment? Steve, do you want to take that question? Maybe others can chime in.
You bet. Happy to, Ken. So yeah, rapid deployment, you know, these methodologies are very popular right now. As Gary had mentioned, you know, the contracts for SaaS solutions look different than the old software license deals from, you know, 20, 25 years ago. And typically, you know, you're subscribing to this software. So it's more akin to like a Netflix subscription than it is to, you know, purchasing software that you would have done, you know, 20 years ago. And the cost of that subscription starts on day one when you sign the contract. As a result, we've seen, you know, tremendous pressure on vendors for, you know, clients wanting to go live quickly. And so all vendors have responded to that pressure and developed, you know, rapid implementation methodologies. I think what I would say about it is my comments earlier about needing to de-scope in phase one apply double or triple. If you're following a rapid implementation methodology, you're going to have to be really, really tight on scope, and you're going to end up having multiple phases. And so, you know, you need to be prepared to do that. I think the other piece of advice I would give is before you start your phase one, you really ought to invest in some process harmonization and look to streamline your processes, and that will enable you to go live more quickly.
Hey, I'll add something on the rapid deployment too, that got to make sure that there's ample time for your staff to get up to speed on the new product while they're still doing their old work too. So
Yeah.
Rapid deployment means less time for people getting comfortable with the new technology. So sometimes it creates a knowledge gap in how to use the new version of HR that you're using.
And Steve, if I could add one other thing, that is be careful about the budget, because a rapid implementation is often sold as a lower cost implementation. And then when the real world hits and things aren't working quite the way you need them to, those are all going to be budget overruns. So be very careful about the budget with a rapid implementation.
Good points.
I think the last piece on that is many of the vendors pre-package the scope of those implementations, the number of job codes, the number of integrations. So making sure up front, you know exactly what you need and that you are truly a candidate for a rapid deployment is also important as well. Otherwise, you may find surprises along the way that you're not able to adjust for without significant cost overruns. Well, with that, why don't we wrap up here? Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Hopefully you all received valuable takeaways from this session today, no matter where you are in your journey. And please continue to send us questions, and those that we weren't able to get to during the session, we'll follow up on. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the forum. And I'll turn it back over to Anthony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Cindy, Gary, Steve, for a detailed, excellent presentation. I think a lot of valuable information certainly shared over the last hour with our group here. So just again, thank you for your efforts and everything on that. Appreciate that. Again, you have the contact information for all of our presenters. So should you have any follow-up questions for any of today's presenters, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to address those questions, as well as part of that. I'm gonna hand things off here to Matt Doherty from our Workforce Risk Management team. Matt, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. It's really an honor to speak before this group. We're here to talk today about threat assessment and the threat management teams, which in many cases, many of you are familiar with, either through state mandates or the own self-initiative of those campuses and higher ed institutions that have implemented these critically important programs. So just as an introduction, who I am, Matt Doherty. I retired from the Secret Service, where I ran the National Threat Assessment Center. We conducted studies at the request of the Department of Education as a result of Columbine K-12 guidance, not only for law enforcement, but school officials, and also provided guidance on bystander studies, et cetera, especially after the Virginia Tech shooting that we'll talk about. On my staff here at Sikich, we are truly a turnkey operation here. I run our workforce risk management. We support the public and private sectors and educational institutions on supporting threat assessment teams and management teams by training, developing their programs, and looking at their policies for best practices. On our staff, we have clinical psychologists, open source intelligence, social media staff, and on a daily basis, we consult regularly on cases. So to talk about how critically important it is to your campus, when freshmen come in, current and prospective undergrad and grad students, this is just a recent survey by Best Colleges survey. It's astounding that when I went to college, this wasn't even on the radar, but 65% say school shootings make them concerned for their safety on campus as a current or future student. 60% say it was a factor they considered campus safety when choosing their college. When I went to college, there was not that much of a concern about those types of issues. So it really is. And when we support the private sector, the worst thing that can happen when there's an incident and there are not programs is bad reviews on Indeed that it's not a safe place to work. And the same goes for higher education institutions. A lot of what is going on now that many of you are probably familiar with is a direct result of the Virginia Tech shooting. They did have a threat management team where 32 people were killed and 23 were wounded. They did have a threat management team. And what is a threat management team? It was the critical turning point. But a threat management team is that interdisciplinary process where you have different members of the team looking at the concerning situation on the part of employees and especially on the part of the students when you have concerning behaviors. It really was a tragic and potentially preventable event. That student in the classroom was so disruptive that a very popular teacher threatened to resign if he was not removed. He had very inappropriate behaviors. She was a very popular teacher and her attendance was going down. Meanwhile, campus security had done a mental health commitment for him out of the dorm because of inappropriate behaviors, particularly towards women. That should have triggered him being prohibited from purchasing weapons, but probably one of the biggest weaknesses was the campus police was not part of the interdisciplinary threat management team. The threat management team was mainly considered an academic exercise for treating students in need, and campus security was pretty much relegated to the parking lot. There was lots of behaviors there that could have potentially prevented this. And out of that, for those of you that are interested, the Virginia Tech Review is an outstanding report on moving forward with those lessons learned and best practices. It's no coincidence that Virginia now has a state law that all public universities must have a threat management team in place. Most state laws follow that, and I'm sure even though there are many private institutions here, that you should be familiar with that practice. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about threat management teams. How do you conduct a threat assessment, which is much different than a criminal investigation or a disciplinary hearing? Common misconceptions about how to conduct those assessments, who should be on the team, building a best practice, common challenges, and really we'll talk about some of those obstacles, the information sharing obstacles and public safety exceptions to many of the privacy laws, including state laws that are out there, and then appreciate an open discussion at the end of this briefing. Okay, so our first code word here is 771, 4 of 6. So I just want to take a moment out and I'll report the results, but does your institution have a threat assessment and threat management team? We'll report the results in just a few minutes here. Pardon my glasses. So that's great. That's encouraging to me. 59% do have a team in place. 15% do not, and 26% are unsure. So I'm glad, hopefully there'll be a receptive audience to this presentation to debunk some of the myths, get the latest best practices. We even have a current case study. So the goal of a threat management team, it really is originated out of the shop I used to run, the National Threat Assessment Center, numerous times called by the Department of Education to conduct studies of targeted violence attacks in an effort to prevent them. I recommend you go to the National Threat Assessment Center website. There's definitely preventive measures there. I've trained tens of thousands of state and local and school officials in targeted school violence prevention. But it's very clear that in our studies, it's preventable when those communities identify warning signs and it's reported. How many of you have seen those types of cases that come forward, hit the media, when other students, other faculty were possibly concerned about this person, but there was no reporting mechanism and no management of the case? So it's a pretty astounding statement that we had in 2021. Again, I recommend that you review that report if you are predisposed to do so. So it's really behavior-based, and that's very important for those in HR and student affairs. Conducting threat assessment means you don't profile students. You know, when the Department of Education asked us after Columbine if we could have a profile, could come up with a profile of a student, we looked at 37 we looked at 41 shooters and 37 incidents, and there really is no useful demographic profile. And that's the good news as far as us trying to misappropriate or profile a student. We came up with a profile for them, but it wasn't useful. It was a white male between the ages of 11 and 21 who had trouble with the opposite sex in relationships and listened to loud music. And that frankly describes a significant part of our demographic population in academic institutions. And when that happens, part of our study included an African-American kid who was an honor student who was suffering from depression and committed an act of targeted violence. There was a Catholic high school girl in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, and that debunked the myth that a profile of a shooter was possibly always male. But so you need that threat assessment team to identify and assess risk situations and educate that team look for key warning signs and risk factors. And in each case, about these cases that we looked at, there were life stressors, whether it be divorce, illness, death in the family, financial problems, work conflicts. And you really need to apply some structured tools that I'll talk about. And this is what the threat management team should be doing on a yearly basis, if not a quarterly basis. Should be meeting, should be constantly trained. I can't tell you the number of times, for those of you that do have threat management teams, I'd ask myself, when's the last time they've been trained? Have personnel moved around for attrition, especially in this post-pandemic world? We always say that the policies should be written and endorsed by the leadership. The program is the responsibility of everybody in the community. And you need to empower that team to assess threats innovatively and dynamically. So with proper training experience, what happened at Virginia Tech, they really weren't currently trained. It was pretty much an academic staff exercise where the teacher who objected to him being in their class and disruptive, unbeknownst to the academic society or circles there, they did not know that the campus police had engaged him, had done the right thing, but they had not communicated it mutually between the academic world and the security world. And there was many things developed that would have helped that threat assessment if they knew how to investigate the situation more broadly than just limiting to your behavior in a particular classroom. So that would have helped you truly pose the risk or not. It's really tragic that this person should not have been in possession of weapons because of court-ordered mental health treatment, and yet walked into a gun store within hours after him being released, and he purchased a weapon with his own ID. Next slide. So there's some common misperceptions that threat assessment is the same as traditional mental health counseling. We applaud the mental health community. There are partners in this oftentimes, but in most cases, they are not trained in violent risk assessment. Threat assessment is really drawing a circle around that person. What are coworkers, students, fellow students, instructors, campus security? What are they saying about the person's behavior, rather than just a referral to a therapist? And there's a disadvantage, which the therapist would be the first to tell you. Their assessment, their opinion is only as good as the information coming forward. Again, threat assessment is not profiling, as I said before. Profiling is very, very arduous at best. There is no useful demographic profile, much to the delight of our HR colleagues. You cannot profile. It's not an incoming freshman. It's not a grad student. It's not a high, many of these incidents occur by high stressful individuals that have high academic performance, or people that are failing out due to issues such as depression or other underdeveloped skill sets, such as in the Virginia Tech case. The part that we emphasize in not only schools and workplaces is that it is not a punitive program. It is not tattling. When you have concern, back in my day in an academic institution, you kind of minded your own business. And that's the effort that's going on here now. We conduct many podcasts at the request of the US government, the Department of Defense, for their facilities, that you really have to get away from no tolerance. In other words, we are sure that if a fight occurred on campus or blatant sexual harassment, that'll be reported. But what we're talking about is somebody having concerning behaviors, and it's not a punitive program to get the person in trouble. It's about early intervention. And anybody reported to the threat assessment, another misconception, will be suspended, expelled, or punished or fired if they go before the threat assessment team. And by the way, there's different nomenclature for it. Virginia Tech calls it a care team. We've had different nomenclature to get away from that stigma. But that's another misconception, that anybody reported is immediately disciplined. It's not a disciplinary process. There's processes for that on your campuses, usually through student affairs and a discipline committee. This is not what this is about in a threat management team environment. So those are some of the misconceptions. So who should be on the team? If you notice, just that lesson learned from Virginia Tech, for those of you that did have the threat management teams that have it in place, campus law enforcement, without a doubt, should be a member of that team, or at least an ad hoc member, so you can make an inquisitory if there's liaison with local law enforcement, if there's incidents in the dorms, et cetera, outside of the academic class. The Dean of Students should definitely be part of that. General Counsel's office. One of the reasons the Dean of Students, we usually recommend the records are usually kept in student affairs or the Dean of Students for these types of cases. General Counsel's office, there without a doubt, and I'll get to it in a few moments here, some obstacles for information sharing, and the General Counsel's office should be familiar with public safety exceptions, what the university or the higher ed should share with others outside of the campus. A behavioral expert, I'm sure you have access to mental health counseling teams, they should be a member. HR, without a doubt, should be a member, particularly if it's and Flash News Bulletin, faculty are not exempt from having concerning behaviors, but HR should be represented there. The Student Conduct Office, maybe in an ad hoc basis, but these are all members of the team that if you don't have an inclusive interdisciplinary members, and including the communications team, representative, and sometimes the college president, if it gets to be serious or the college is small enough where the president wants to hear about this, these are the people that should be regularly participating in these concerning cases once they rise to the level and concerning or warning signs are reported to that entity. So, so establishing that team, it definitely has to be established with multidisciplinary. We don't need 8 members of HR and 1 student affairs. We need that to be multidisciplinary. They need to define what are concerning and prohibitive behaviors, and those are vary in degree. It could be stalking, which is very common in a campus setting. Those types of things should be defined so that you have that central reporting mechanism, whether it be anonymous. A lot of times we find in institutions that anonymous, you should definitely leverage any anonymous reported hotline, because somebody might not want to get too involved and report their fellow student or a faculty member, worker at the campus, and determine the threshold for law enforcement intervention. That's why it's so important to train every year on scenarios. When do you not bring in local law enforcement? They are a tremendous resource. Just recently, in the last few years, the Fraternal Order of Police have directed their membership, whenever you're asked to participate in a threat management team, you should do so. They'd much rather respond to an early intervention, not with the intention of making an arrest, but they can find out in the incidents in the community, such as the Parkland High School incident, where 39 visits took place at the home, unbeknownst to the academic environment. Establish those assessment procedures. How do we meet? Who should chair the meetings? Those types of things. Who should record any information, and develop risk management options. That could be referral to mental health counseling. It could be rise to the level of possibly a criminal investigation if there's weapons involved. And you need that, and I'm not implying otherwise, your higher ed does this anyway, according to their policies, create and promote safe school climates. And if you look at that survey, that's just critically important and needs to be addressed. And then last but not least, conduct that training. Again, policies are the responsibility of leadership, but the program is responsible. The responsibility resides in everyone at the institution. But if you don't conduct training on a regular basis, and we'll talk about a case in a minute, people come and go, again, attrition, you really have to train and fine tune those skills and meet regularly. I know everybody has their day jobs, but the training is well worth a day out of the time, at least annually. And then the team, even if they don't have any cases, should meet annually or quarterly just to make sure that they're on the same page of what they're looking for. So what does the team investigate? Life stressors. The number one question in a threat assessment, and this is not meant to train you in threat assessment today, it's just that to ensure that you do have a threat management team, to ensure that it's funded and has been trained, but you look at stressors. What the number one question is, what motivated that person to come to your attention in the first place? We found that with all of the FBI after action reports that you've seen in the media of incidents, there's some life stressor going on in their life that caused them to cause the behavior that they did. You want to look at emotional issues. A significant number of them experienced desperation or despair, had inappropriate interests. What is that? In mass shootings or mass violent attacks, the number of people that almost hero worship the Columbine shooter is just incredible. And we know they have violence as an option. What kind of weapons do they have access to? There's a big myth out there about obtaining weapons. In many, many cases, the weapons are legally obtained, but they probably shouldn't have possessed them in the first place, such as the Virginia Tech. Do they have the capacity? And there are many motives for carrying out these violent attacks. It could be fame or notoriety, suicide-assisted, law enforcement suicide-assisted, many other motives, avenging national attention to a perceived wrong or grievances, and planning. We also look at mitigating or protective factors. Somebody expresses remorse. Once they are confronted with their inappropriate behaviors, they want to get help. So we want to look at that. Where are they on this path? And if they're willing to get some help, that's a great sign for us in threat management. Understanding. That's why you need that legal team to document where are the notes going to be kept, what kind of notes. You should be fair, objective, reasonable, and timely. You should not include thinking out loud. You really need to understand those document protocols. And in most cases that I've seen, and we here at Workforce Risk Management at Sikich have seen, the student files on these cases reside with the Dean of Student Affairs. If it's a concern about an employee, whether it be a teacher, maintenance person, whatever it is, those files usually reside in HR, and that's just an FYI on how those records are kept. It's really the other challenge we see is failing to implement the case management plan. Threat assessment and threat management must be intertwined. You can manage cases, lots of cases, and a lot of cases come to your attention, but how do you manage them? Even with former students, what kind of liaison with law enforcement or the mental health community is there? Should you monitor their social media legally, open source? We do that quite regularly with our staff. One of our clients had a terminated person and they took a selfie from the boss's house, from the front of the boss's house. Well, we monitor that social media to see if they had an interest in weapons, mass violence. And you really want to see if failing to implement this can really result in a liability, a safety risk, and a great deal of legal exposure to your campus. And it can just devastate your reputation as well. Our next code word, 5 of 6, is 785. 785. So some of the lessons learned, Oxford had a shooting in Oxford, Michigan. And for the first time, and personally, I was glad to see that, as long as a lot of other threat assessment subject matter experts, where the parents were aware that some harm was going to be done. So the parents were actually arrested in this case. It's one of the first cases I know of where that happened, because the weapons were supplied out of the home. There was warnings from the mother, don't do it, that type of thing. But a 15-year-old student in Oxford shot and killed. And if you look at the statement from the superintendent, they didn't use its threat assessment policy. As I said, its own policies can sit on the shelf unless they're practiced regularly with training, and update the policy should be updated every year, because players change, nuances can change, legalities can change. The superintendent said it wasn't used as designed in the months leading up to the shooting. There's no evidence that we've ever used it as it is designed. In other words, these behaviors and these incidents that you see on campuses, they are clearly and potentially preventable if there was early intervention on a threat management. We're not looking for the first stop to be an expulsion or suspension, or in a law enforcement format to make sure the person's arrested. That's not what threat assessment is. It's about early intervention that may lead to an arrest, but very rarely. We want to make sure that's manageable. And that's the problem, even if you do have a threat management case. And case management plans, just look at this. You probably heard about a former student that shot and killed 3 UVA football players returning on a bus from a class field trip. The UVA, and they have an outstanding, reputable threat assessment team. And I want to make sure that I emphasize, this is according to media accounts, because the facts still haven't borne out yet in any officially sanctioned state or federal, state, or local document. But by media accounts, the threat assessment team learned that the subject had been involved in a criminal incident involving a concealed weapon when he was a student there. So, and then in September, another student reported the subject having a weapon, which was brought to the attention of the threat assessment team. I'll be very curious, where was the early intervention on how he was still able to possess a weapon, enter on campus, not confronted, and it's getting a tremendous amount of public scrutiny. All you have to do is Google UVA threat management team, and this story will come up for reams and reams of pages, and scrutiny and criticism in the media of what the threat assessment team knew and when did they know it. And that's very important. What I'll be curious, and they do have a very reputable team, did they meet quarterly? Were they trained regularly? Were the team members, did they come and go through attrition, or were they a well-established team? Did they have the power vested in them from leadership at the campus to make decisions and get authority from the highest levels possible? I just want to talk about probably 2 of the biggest obstacles to information sharing that you see on campus. And again, the Virginia Tech Review is an outstanding guide for this, because one of the things that Virginia Tech did, they thought they couldn't share the disruptive behavior in the classroom. It was a very popular English teacher, and she noticed her attendance going down, and she asked some of the kids in the class, how come nobody's attending my class? They said, well, we're fear of this person. He's inappropriately looking under people's desks. He's staring at us. You know, it looks like he has some inappropriate behaviors with the opposite sex. You know, it's definitely some opposite gender issues. And so the institution at Virginia Tech said, well, we didn't want to share that because it was a FERPA protected. Most of you are familiar with FERPA, where it's an academic record. And even those parents out there who are paying their kids college tuition, they're not entitled to see the grades because of the FERPA protection laws. And the Virginia Tech Review, which was an exhaustive review by federal, state, and local law enforcement and school officials and Department of Education officials, that was a gross misinterpretation of FERPA. Your behavior in class, your behaviors are not are a public safety exception to FERPA records. They are not an academic record. And even if it is an academic record, if there's an emergency, that public safety exception trumps all for that. HIPAA, situations where privacy concerns and the interest is imminent and threat to the safety. There are public safety exceptions to HIPAA. We deal with this all the time when we work cases and somebody is referred to mental health counseling or employee assistance programs, which you all have one. There are public safety exceptions. If you refer somebody to employee assistance, for instance, they have a duty by law to report any threatening information. In other words, if someone says, I'm going to kill my fellow student on Monday, and they're receiving mental health counseling, they're required by law to report that. So that's one of the reasons why legal counsel needs to be on that team and needs to be familiar with the public safety exceptions to sharing information, whether it be FERPA or HIPAA. The American Disabilities Act comes into play on many of these privacy laws. There are public safety exceptions, and I'm not expecting you all to be familiar with this. This is just an informational brief anyway, but people should be very familiar with those public safety exceptions, especially legal counsel. They'll be carrying the torch for this. So widespread confusion over the privacy laws. They failed to communicate with one another, and they even failed to communicate with the shooter's parents, which was very tragic. This kid was in need of some serious help. Everyone knew it, but they didn't want to share it with the parents because they thought it was a FERPA record. And it was prohibited by federal laws to share HIPAA or FERPA information with the parents. And that's just not the case. That mental health commitment, he should have been in a database where he couldn't have purchased the weapon. That was another failing, that a threat management team would have ensured that took place, but they didn't share the information with the parents. And it was just devastating to them. They didn't know their kid was in distress because of a misinterpretation of these privacy laws. They did not have a clear understanding of those safety exceptions, and they would have had ample leeway to share those informations. I can't tell you the number of times my team here at Workforce Risk Management, as we advise academic institutions and private sector entities, the fact that, listen, that EAP, remind them that they need to share that information. Let's talk to his coworker, family, friends. There are a variety of ways to do this in clear consultation with legal counsel. So the key takeaway for this is that students and parents consider campus safety when choosing their college or university. That's a question now, as the parents are walking around with that prospective freshman to do that. And the number of liability cases that we're seeing now, you can have all the technology in the world with Smart Alert and all the companies that we work closely with, the Blue Towers. But if you don't have your threat assessment management team in place, that's probably your biggest vulnerability, because it truly is the best practice for preventing and mitigating violence. Again, you may be in a high crime area, and all those physical security, the Blue Towers, the phones, the emergency buttons, etc. But really, if you don't have a threat management team that has been trained and regularly practiced and funded, you're really exposing yourself to a liability, vulnerability, and tragic consequences. The multidisciplinary makeup is the hallmark of a team. I would hope that at your institutions, and you may want to ask, it should not be just an academic membership in that team. It should represent, again, legal counsel, HR, dean of students, and let's not forget about campus security. They really need to be on a loop and should be practiced. They should be trained, and that's why the training is so important. You're not just there to determine whether somebody made a direct threat or not, or somebody committed an overt act of sexual violence or got in a fight. You know, that's a topic for a disciplinary procedure. We're talking about how to identify key warning signs, stalking, domestic abuse is huge now. And your campus is a workforce. It just came out, the latest statistics, 60% of women killed in the workplace are killed by an intimate partner. So what does that tell us? You need to be trained on what the warning signs are for somebody that is a possible victim of domestic abuse. That might, some of those warning signs in our training is wearing excessive makeup to hide bruises, living in the car alone, those types of things. That way, the team is trained on what those concerning behaviors are. And you really need to get the word out there. There needs to be clearly in the student handbook and the guidance to emphasize that there is a team, and you can call it something else. It's been called a care team, safe team. Many of our clients call it something else to avoid any stigmatizing. But internally and externally, letting people know that we're here, we care, and it's not a punitive exercise. If you're concerned about a certain situation in your environment, a fellow student, faculty member, employee, there's a support mechanism here. And, you know, it can be brief training. That's why we always recommend a shortened awareness training for everybody in the campus, training teachers on de-escalating situations, things like that. But the goal is not punitive. And that's what's really turned the corner. We're members of the Society of Human Resource Management, and that's the guidance and standards that they're putting out now is that let's get away from zero tolerance. Again, sexual harassment, direct threats, fights, those, of course, are dealt with discipline. That doesn't mean we're not going to fire somebody when they need to be fired. But you really want to have that goal of helping people and having early intervention. And just don't let sharing information, don't be limited on sharing information according to the privacy laws. So I hope those are all things that you're going to consider throughout this exercise. Again, code word 6 of 6 is 502. 502.
Matt, thank you for a great presentation. And certainly a sobering topic, but I think as you started off your comments with there, the percentages of students and certainly those of us that are parents of whatever age it is there, this is something that it's the landscape has changed on this, and it has really caused us to think differently, whether it's our own children or the students that we see on campus every day as part of this. It's a higher responsibility and just a different level of concern on that. So I know we had some time here for open discussion at the end, so I encourage you to send any questions over to Sikich admin Megan on that. But Matt, a few questions for you, kind of just to reinforce some of the things in your presentation, and then just a couple other things that I learned and had some questions on going along the way. So first one here is, what have you seen? And I know you've been a participant in a lot of these after incident discussions and looked into a lot of these things, but what have been some of the information sharing obstacles to campus security and safety that you've seen?
It's a great question. In targeted violence cases, and I don't want to talk about exact statistics because they're growing every day and changing according to whether it's kindergarten or in this case, higher ed, but in over the vast majority of cases, other kids, students, faculty, how many times have you seen that in the media where other people knew that there were concerning behaviors and didn't know who to report it to? So the biggest obstacle is not having a successful, robust prevention program that everybody knows how to report information, even if it's anonymous. I had a Washington Post reporter. He would interview me after active shooter cases. His name is Mark Berman. He specializes in active shooter cases. And after the fourth interview, where I always said, look, the person hasn't been identified yet, but there's a variety of motives that these individuals have. And there's a high likelihood his behavior was known by others at the workplace or the higher education institution. The problem was it probably didn't have a robust program of reporting and early intervention. So those are the big obstacles, not having a robust program. Again, policies can sit on my back shelf or in an academic office, that's really not a successful program. It looks good in writing, like the Oxford, Mississippi. So those are some of the biggest obstacles. That the information's there, it's creating that reporting mechanism and assuring people it's not a punitive program.
Absolutely. I think, for a lot of the, participants in, our forum today, these are folks that are in a, CFO, VP of finance type roles on here as well. And, oftentimes, kind of fold this into a bit of a, a two-part question. This is one that I kind of, drew some parallels to in terms of what we see and my area, Matt, as from an audit standpoint here, but oftentimes from a finance standpoint, we're very involved in creating policies, creating procedures, and to address certain risks. Obviously, very different types of risk that we're talking about here. But one of the things that I think we see as a regular failure is, we develop the policy, we consider those things, we maybe involve the right stakeholders in that process there, but then after, the monitoring piece drops off. Is that something that you have seen, in, your experience, that, maybe we do go through and develop those policies, but then the kind of the regular training on that, or being able to say, okay, well, we have this policy in place, is it doing what we need it to? Curious if that's something that you see as an area that, warrants a closer look and needs improvement.
Absolutely. Oftentimes these policies, again, most states, if not all of them, require threat management teams, for instance, at higher ed. And oftentimes, my safe assumption is, when there is an incident and I am contacted by the media or we're personally involved in the case, one of the things I look for, is it really a program, or does this just a check the box? Like you said, we're required to have these policies. Let's check the box. Here's our binder. Here it is on the share drive with the higher ed. But if you look deeper, who are the members? Oh, this person hasn't been an employee here in 3 years. So that means it's like an emergency management plan. It has to constantly be updated. So it is a very good point. It might say it in the student handbook that there is a team you need to report this to, but if the team hasn't practiced or hasn't met in an entire year, then it's really not a successful program. So I couldn't agree more. There's oftentimes compliancy, like we do with a lot of our processes and procedures, kind of check the box as opposed to a robust ongoing program.
Well, I think especially, and obviously this well from your previous role with the Secret Service on this, but when it comes to federal guidelines, especially in higher education, there is a lot of that check the box that's necessary to be able to do that, and disclosures that have to be made as part of this process there. But the value is going beyond that level, as you noted there. So question from the audience here for you, Matt, that came through. And this is to the extent, I think it's going to vary, but to what extent should campus public safety get involved in threat situations such as an active shooter versus calling 911 for local police to handle that situation?
Well, that's a broad question, and it's a great question. I'd have several questions. Is the campus police, are they armed or unarmed? Have they trained with the local police? How competent are they? How sophisticated they are? Obviously, smaller campuses might have a direct conduit to local law enforcement. Again, those things should be thought out well in advance. I would think I hate to use that term, it depends on any of my answers on these types of briefs, but it depends on the sophistication of campus security. Is it, with all due respect to that work, is it an unarmed guard in a booth? But even then, they should be trained when there is incidents. That's why law enforcement, since Columbine, has changed so much. It used to be that you'd surround the perimeter of the institution and send in maybe hostage rescue. Let's see what we have, who's in the room. Well, we know now that whoever is the first law enforcement to arrive on the scene, they have to immediately go in and try to mitigate the situation and really take out that violent action. That is a pronounced change in tactical responses to these types of situations. Police officers are used to, surrounding the perimeter. Let's set up a base camp, all those things. So that's a great question. And I think that question now would be asked of each and every campus. How sophisticated is campus security? Are they armed? Do they train with local law enforcement? And is there a memorandum of agreement, an MOA or an MOU, memorandum of understanding on what those should be? That should not be, that should be well thought out way in advance of this type of conversation. So great question. Wish I had thought of it myself for each of you to ask your own campuses.
Well, I think it is one of those things too, where a lot of our participants are going to be members of their respective senior leadership teams or cabinet positions on this as well. So bring these questions up and ask these questions. That's why we asked, had Matt participate in the forum and be able to think about this, even though necessarily it's not, may not be under your direct purview on that.
Yes.
This is life and death, and it's critical to not only have those policies and have those procedures in place for that there, but to practice them. And I think that goes beyond just the campus, whether it's campus police, whether it's the active shooter drills or things of that nature that we hear. I think from what I hear, you personally hear about more of the elementary K through 12, with the regular drills and going through their active shooter drills as part of that. Continuing to do those. We've seen recently, down in Texas, where even law enforcement needs to continue practicing these things as well. Matt, have you, in terms of whether it's that specific example down in Uvalde or whatnot, there, should the institutions have law enforcement, they're part of those response drills when they have those?
Yeah, absolutely. That I'm hoping most people, if not all, have heard of that run, hide, fight philosophy. Get away from the incident, and if you have to hide, you should be predisposed in a security awareness training on how to do that. And just as some of the training has changed significantly, we're starting to see at Workforce Risk Management at Sikich, the term active shooter, we're really getting away from that. It's really active assailant. I meet with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago down in Quantico, it's active assailant because most of there's a mythology out there about active shooter that it's always a disillusioned white male with a long gun, when in fact, there's a variety of demographics, as I said earlier here, and most of the actions are carried out with handguns. So one of the early DHS, Department of Homeland Security videos portrayed a white male with a long gun with a black BDU outfit, this Hollywood mythological, lots of Hollywood music, and they had blood ketchup packets, and this was your training for active assailant. My HR colleagues were appalled at this type of training. It's not exactly what you'd want to show at freshman orientation for your campus. It's too alarming. There are some practical recommendations that we have adopted for run, hide, fight, and it's really what is the situation in it ahead of time. I'll give you a classic example out of that training. We all can go to the movie theaters out of the pandemic. I know we have all watched a lot of streaming lately in the last couple of years, but I would venture that you don't go to a church, your place of worship, or a theater without taking a look around just subconsciously where the exits are. That was ingrained in me in the Secret Service many, many years ago, but that's now second nature to our society, right? Be aware of that situation where you were in. The training is, I don't want to say it's soft training, but it's not alarmist. It's what have we learned from these after actions? What should people do? And look around now in your workplace, for instance. I urge all of you to do that. If you're working on a job site, not working out of a home office during the pandemic, if I had to get out of here, where would I go? How would I get away? Those types of things. Critically important, should be well thought of in advance. But our federal government and state and local law enforcement officials have come a long way since Columbine on getting the message out in a safe and secure way.
Yeah, it's hard to believe we're coming up on 25 years since Columbine. It's really kind of crazy thought. I had a question in the chat here, Matt, and I think this is going to fall under that it depends category as well, based on the technology being used and other considerations here. But I know one of the things, the question is how big a department would have to be with 50,000 students, 5 colleges, scanning social media, all that's necessary there. I know enough to say that, it depends on the nature of the technology being used and other considerations there, but thoughts in terms of how you determine what is the, appropriate, size of the team, and, in terms of how you put some of those safeguards in place?
Yeah, I mean, we've trained a consortium of colleges in California, for instance. It's not so much of it depends. A lot of times we'll have regional teams. For instance, we've trained the Social Security Administration. There's 11 regions as far away as Guam. And so they each have their regional team and reporting back to, headquarters. So if there's 5 campuses, for instance, there should, without a doubt, be 5 teams, but there should be a reporting mechanism. And that's why it's so important to look at those policies and programs. If I understand correctly, 5 campuses, there should be an individual team devoted to that campus. Now you'd have to look at the population. Is it just a couple of 100 kids per campus, or is it a full-blown, medium to large size campus? They should have their own individual teams, and it should be regionalized so that they can attend to their concerning issues. Because these concerning issues, most people that will come to your attention, the vast majority, just like in the Secret Service, will ever result in an arrest or an expulsion. It's early intervention to get the people the help they need. And I'm afraid if you become too bureaucratic and keep it at the mothership or the headquarters and not have it as a regional basis. So I would say there would be 5 teams reporting up to a centralized team. Again, everybody has their day job. Now we are seeing in campus security, public safety, that they are the team leads. Virginia Tech, their deputy chief is dedicated solely, but they have 25 to 30,000 students. They're dedicated solely to the threat assessment process. It's a full-time day job. I would think, from what I've seen in the enrollment here, most of them wouldn't warrant a full-time person. Everybody has their day job: HR, legal, security, public safety, et cetera.
Understood. No, thank you. That's helpful. And I think it's, seeing that, when you do have those decentralized locations and the, varying, considerations that go into each of those, that while you may have a main campus or flagship location that, where, administration is housed as part of that, being able to have those location specific considerations, I think makes a lot of sense and is critically important there. So that covers, I think, most of the questions we had from our audience as well. So I just want to, again, thank you for your time and for your presentation today. Again, as a reminder for everyone here, please make sure to enter today's code words and log out of the conferences.io site there. You'll see a email survey coming from Sikich University. Prolera is the name that you'll see coming through there. Please make sure to complete that for your CPE credits. With that, we'll go ahead and give you a little bit of time back today. We'll begin at 10 a.m. tomorrow for our 10 a.m. Central for our GASB and FASB breakout sessions, as well as our single audit compliance updates for you all as well. Thank you for participation and your questions for today. If you do have any questions for any of our presenters from Ken's team this morning or Matt's presentation, please feel free to reach out. That's why we're here. Again, thank you for your time and attention today. Look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.